Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
So this has happened before, but not to this extent. I worked in a haunted corn maze this year. Basically we dress up and scare anyone who walks through. It was all COVID safe and approved. All workers have to wear a mask, obviously, and dress up as something scary. I was dressed up as a little dick girl, but I got called a doll. Not the point. It was one of our slow nights, Wednesday or Thursday, and it was like the last 30 minutes. Now, I was tired, hungry, sweaty, and dirty as hell as I crawled on the ground and just wanted to get home. I heard someone walking towards my area and hid like I normally did. Now, mind you, no one is supposed to hide in the corn, pick up the corn, and especially not throw the corn. Only the workers are allowed to hide. We aren't even allowed to walk through the corn to get out. We have to follow the path. So I hid in the corn and I heard corn being ripped from a stalk. You know the sound after hearing it constantly from kids and other workers taking the low-hanging ones off. I immediately stepped out, ready to be blunt with a person and see a woman with 4 kids. The youngest was probably 5 and the oldest was probably 16 or 17, something like that. You cannot touch the corn. Whatever you have, put down and continue on the path. If you were, "Don't tell my child what to do, little girl." "Sorry, we didn't know," the big kid says and proceeds to remove corn from the little kid's hands. "Don't listen to her. She's a stupid kid. I'm taking this home to cook it." She then proceeds to stuff corn into her purse and start walking over, dragging one of the other kids with her. "Ma'am, first off, you can't take corn from the maze, and second off, it's not gonna taste. If you don't get out of my face, I will call the cops on you for harassing me and my children." "Listen, lady, I've tried being nice, but you need to remove the corn from your purse or I'll have security escort you out." She then pushes me. I'm in a dress in the cold and boy, that fall really hurts. And then walks away all proud. The big kid helped me up and apologized profusely for his mom before walking over and tried to get the corn from her purse. I had enough when I saw her smack his head then scream at him. I immediately cut through the corn, I didn't care at the moment, and headed to my co-worker's area. That day I did not bring my whistle given to us in case of emergencies. So I asked him to follow her out of the corn maze. We're supposed to follow suspicious people like kids constantly going into the corn, people we think are drunk, or kids we noticed acting a little strange. It's a weird area I live in. So my co-worker followed her out of the corn maze, I think, so I was fine with it. Had her warning given and then she would be off on her merry way. Nope, the siren rang for us to get out and pack up our stuff. So I followed one of the paths I knew out and was instantly bombarded. I got pulled aside by security as Karen was screaming and crying about how a child was harassing her and her angels. And she had a creepy man follow her out. And she has never been so unsafe in her life. And she wanted me arrested for causing trauma to her kids. So security asked me what happened. They knew me as a weird worker who would scream Disney lyrics as she walked in to get ready or show up randomly in a onesie, and asked who escorted her and blah blah. I asked her kids not to touch the corn. She didn't listen and even started packing corn into her purse to eat later. Security gave a gross look. "This corn is not meant for human consumption. Please don't listen to my mom. She's just being hysterical again. Nothing like that happened except the creepy guy part. I don't know if he's a worker or not, but the little kid did rip corn from a corn stalk and she was just doing her job." The big kid explained. "Mommy told me to, so I can have some since it's free," the little one told the security. Karen was away from us, currently crying into the owner's sweater. My coworker finally walked out of the corn maze, probably helping the other guards take out the trash, and tilted his head, confused. He was wearing a clown mask and was a chainsaw guy who ran after people with a chainsaw that had no chain. "That's the dude." The big kid pointed at my coworker. "Oh, I asked him to follow you all out. I didn't feel safe following you out because of your mother, and I wanted to make sure you didn't do anything like that again. My coworker walked over and looked at me, confused. He usually worked with me, so I could tell his facial features by the slight movements of his body. Oh my god, he's the one who stalked me and my children. He's probably some pervert who walks around here to kidnap little people like the disgusting 30-year-old man he is. Now this woman had annoyed me to the point I wanted to hit her, but I started dying laughing, like to the point I couldn't breathe. Why? Well, my coworker was a 16-year-old kid whose mom was a friend of the owner's and several older workers. Karen was losing her mind, confused on why I was laughing and why the sheriffs weren't arresting me and taking me to Rikers Island. Him? He's a worker here, and he's 16, the security told her. Now she's going crazy about how they hire human traffickers here, and that we were all in it and that they were lying, until my coworker removed his mask to show how young he looked. I had gotten to the point where I was using my dress to wipe off my makeup because I was feeling gross. Karen was basically standing around staring at all of us, confused on why nobody was listening to her, and I grinned. Well, as I stated earlier, ma'am, please remove all the corn in your position or I will have security escort you out. Or maybe your cup of tea is a sheriff. Karen is now banned from the corn maze premises for as long as I work there, and I intend on working there for a long time. I live in a 4-unit apartment building on a ground floor with my partner. We have lived here for 3 years, and when we moved in, our upstairs neighbor was a flight attendant who was rarely home. Totally ideal. She moved out and the new tenants could be loud at times, but never much and never late. They moved out after a year. Our story begins with the replacements. A couple, roughly our ages, late 20s, early 30s, moved in. The first few days were pretty loud, but we assumed they wanted to get everything in soon, even if it meant doing so late at night, getting set up and so on. A couple of weeks passed, but the noises never really stopped. Slamming doors at 11 p.m., having loud screaming fights, and so on. My partner is possibly the world's heaviest sleeper. I have a hard time waking him up for anything. He was also lucky enough to travel for work at this time, so he didn't really deal with most of it. When he was home though, it woke him up. Roughly 15 days after moving in, they wake us up at midnight fighting. It quiets down and we go back to sleep. Then we get woken up at 4 a.m. to more fighting. My partner goes up and knocks on a door. He gives a gentle, "Hey guys, sorry to come up, but we have work in the morning and cannot be getting woken up like this." The guy apologizes. The girl has a glassy-eyed stare of someone drinking or taking something. And the whole time her partner is apologizing, she's slurring that her partner is a jerk. My partner comes back downstairs. An hour later, one of the loud couples call the police. They ask for our statements, if we heard anything, what we heard, and that's it. They quiet down for maybe a week. Then a nightly fight starts, waking us up at midnight, 2, 4, sometimes multiple times a night. So, not wanting to be too over the top, we write a note. The general jest being, "Hey, the noise ordinance is 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. You've woken us quite a few times slamming doors or having fights. Would appreciate it if you keep it down during these hours. We don't want to have to involve the landlord, but we do need to sleep." Tape it up on a door and leave it. 2 days later, we received a 2-page return note from the girl. Highlights include, "Fine. I'll leave my garbage not in a cabinet. I sure hope my dog doesn't eat something and die." 2 days later, we received a 2-page return note from the girl. Highlights include, "Fine. I'll leave my garbage not in a cabinet. I sure hope my dog doesn't eat something and die. Also, we can hear you sneeze and go to the bathroom. Should we threaten to call a landlord too?" And quite a few references about their rights in their apartment. I was really angry but almost wanted to hear the reaction of my landlord for being told we sneezed and used the bathroom. Still, my partner went upstairs and tried to clear the air and explained that we definitely don't care what they do, but it's not okay to wake us up during noise ordinance hours. But both times he went up when they were home, they refused to answer. Fine. So I started keeping a log. Simple. November 4, 2:17 a.m. Loud fighting. I did this every time they woke us up. In 2 weeks, we were woken up 10 times. Sometimes twice a night. My partner even recorded it on his phone and boy, it is loud. We emailed it to the landlord and asked if he could please remind him of the noise ordinance because we need to be able to sleep. He did so and it was okay for a couple of weeks. And then it started again. We started responding. If they woke us up, we would knock on a ceiling. It would quiet down. Once we got really annoyed and played Baby Shark on our phone at full blast, pointed at the ceiling for like 30 seconds. Then one night when my partner was out of town for work, they woke me up at 2 a.m. fighting. I knocked on the ceiling, they moved it to the living room, and I tried to sleep. About an hour later, they were back fighting in the bedroom. I knocked and she stomped back as hard as she could, about 10 times, and screamed at me for being a witch. Well then, they kept screaming at each other, throwing things, and setting off their car alarms. I had enough. I called the police and reported the domestic disturbance. The police came, talked to me, went upstairs, slammed on their door and shouted, "Police, open up!" And that's all I knew until I left for work around 6 a.m. I went out to get in my car and found a cell phone and cigarette rolling supplies in the parking lot behind my car. I picked them up and moved them to the grass. Pity, I know. And I went to work. It was still there when I got home. I ignored it. A little while later, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't going to open it but heard a tiny dog, so I knew it was my good neighbor in the other upstairs unit. I let her in, and she asked what happened. I told her I called the cops, and she said she was close to doing the same, and no one had been home there all day. She heard one of them being read their Miranda rights though. I grabbed the stuff from outside and put it outside their door because I didn't want to leave a phone out overnight. Over the next few days, we learned the girlfriend had been put in court-ordered rehab. Apparently, she had clawed the heck out of the guy, among other things. That weekend, they moved their stuff out, her one day and the next day. I wasn't trying to get anyone kicked out, but man, being able to sleep is surely nice. Alright, let me tell you about the craziest thing that ever happened to me. I live in a small neighborhood, a pretty quiet place until our homeowners association started acting like they were running a tiny country. They had rules for everything, how tall your grass could be, what color your house could be painted, and even where you could park your car. But the most ridiculous part was when they tried to stop me from fishing at the pond near my house. It all started one sunny afternoon. I was out fishing, trying to catch some bass at the local pond. I had been fishing there for years, even before I moved into the neighborhood. It was my peaceful escape. One day, while I was reeling in a nice catch, Karen, the head of the HOA, showed up. "What do you think you're doing?" "Fishing. It's a public pond, Karen." "Not anymore. The HOA has decided that fishing is not allowed until you have permission." "Since when? And why wasn't I informed?" "We posted it on the HOA bulletin board. You should check it more often." I sighed. The HOA bulletin board was a joke. It was tucked away in a corner near the community center where nobody ever looked. Plus, they updated it with so many useless rules that it was impossible to keep track. I say, "Karen, this pond isn't even on HOA property. It's public land. The HOA has authority over the neighborhood, and that includes this pond." "That's not how it works, Karen. You don't own the pond." She glared at me, her face turning red. I knew this was the end of it. A few days later, I received an official-looking letter from the HOA. They were threatening to fine me if I continued fishing. I decided to ignore it because, frankly, they had no legal standing. Then things got weirder. I started getting random visits from HOA members whenever I was outside. They would come up with new complaints each time. Your grass is half an inch too long. I'll mow it this weekend. Another HOA member comes to me and says, your car is parked too close to the curb. Well, it's within the allowed distance. It felt like they were targeting me specifically because I didn't bow down to their ridiculous fishing rule. But the last straw was when a couple of teenagers started showing up near my house. They would loiter around acting suspiciously. One night, I was sitting in my living room when I heard a loud crash outside. I rushed out and saw flames on my porch. Turned out, someone had thrown Molotov cocktails at my house. I quickly grabbed the garden hose and started putting out the fire while my wife called the fire department. The firefighters arrived and managed to control the fire before it spread to the rest of the house. The police came too and started investigating. I told them about the recent harassment from the HOA and the teenagers who had been lurking around. The officer asks, do you have any idea who might have done this? I am not sure, but I had trouble with the HOA lately. They don't like that I fish at the pond. The officer took my statement and assured me they would look into it. A few days later, the police came back with some news. Well, we've identified the teenagers who threw the Molotov cocktails. They confessed that they were put up to it by someone. Who? They claimed Karen from the HOA told them to do it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Karen had gone from being a petty tyrant to committing a serious crime like this. The police arrested her and the teenagers. The neighborhood was buzzing with the news and everyone was shocked that the head of the HOA had stooped so low. In the following weeks, the police investigation uncovered more evidence. Karen had been paying the teenagers to harass me. She wanted to scare me into following the HOA ridiculous rules, especially the no fishing rules. Karen was prosecuted and found guilty of incitement and arson. The teenagers were also prosecuted for their part in the crime. It was a long and exhausting ordeal, but justice was served. The HOA was disbanded after that, and the neighborhood decided to form a new, more reasonable association. Now I fish at the pond whenever I want. So yeah, if you ever have trouble with an overbearing HOA, just remember my story. Sometimes you have to fight for your rights, even if it means going up against a Karen with a vendetta. About 2 years ago, I took over a department for a colleague who had retired. He was a good guy and he had run that department for upwards of 15 years. I had spent half of that time hiring obscure relatives. I obviously had no such issues. Some of his personal assignments didn't make a lot of sense. One employee was essentially an expensive chauffeur and tool fixture for a fully qualified employee who frankly did not need the help. He was more useful on an installation team but wasn't assigned there because a supervisor of that team, predecessor's second cousin twice removed or some nonsense like that, didn't like him. As a result, the employee, who we will call him Hot Potato, was someplace he wasn't needed, while another team desperately needed people. Shortly before I actually took over, the cousin got himself fired for stealing. So I grabbed the supervisors and we had a meeting. The one currently supervising Hot Potato, who we will call Bear because he's gigantic, thought it was a waste to have him there, and that he could use the manpower allotment elsewhere. The cousin's replacement, who we will call Jello, because he resembles a certain disgraced salesman of the product, agreed that, while Hot Potato was a pain in the neck, at least he knew which end of a wrench was up. So I left him with a directive to move him over, and we moved on. 2 days later, the new job assignments came out. Bear and I were having a conversation before I headed back home for the weekend, since I had to relocate to take over this department. When Hot Potato left him a voicemail, he picks it up and puts it on speaker, treating me to a symphony of profanity directed at Bear, who is there 3 steps the ladder from him. Hey Bear, I don't know what you're thinking, but this is nonsense. Why do you think you get to pull this? Because you don't like me? Because we get things done? You're going to punish us? This went on for almost 5 minutes. and ended with, "You know what? Forget this. I forget you. I am calling Billiam. If he thinks I'm going to put up with this, I am going to fix that right now." After having a good laugh at that and finishing our smokes, my phone rings. I held it up, asked Bear if that was Hot Potato's number, and he nodded. And I sent him to voicemail and decided to call him back once I got gas, smokes, and some road snacks. I had a 4-hour drive ahead of me, so it would be nice to have something else to do besides stare at the interstate for a bit. I filled the tank, stocked the passenger seat, and got about 20 miles down the road before I called him back. "Sorry, Hot Potato, I must have been in a bad area on the interstate. So I got your message. What's up?" Now he did realize that he was talking to his boss's boss, and did not treat me to quite as much vulgarity as he did Bear. But he did go off. Of course, this was a while ago, so my recollection may be a bit off. "Now listen, Fred and I have been working fine for 6 years, and I'm not sure why I'm being punished because Bear doesn't like me. This is an assignment, and I shouldn't have to put up with this because he wants to act like some sort of big shot and throw himself around just to show off." Again, this went on for several minutes. Eventually, he finished his screed, and it was my turn. "Hot Potato, there is just one problem with your hypothesis. It wasn't Bear's idea. It was mine. I simply don't have enough manpower to waste employees as chauffeurs while there are teams that cannot meet their deadlines. You've benefited from an inefficient assignment for several years because a predecessor didn't want to have to fight his cousin. So to sum it up, you're going to have to go where I need you, not where you want to be. If you had taken this with super stoicism, I wouldn't be here, would I?" "Dude, what the heck? This is nonsense. Why do I have to do this? This is discrimination. I am calling the union." "Okay," I said. "What?" "Call them. You're paying for representation. You have a right to use it. Tell Ted I said hi." "I'm serious. I'm calling him." "I'll be waiting for his call." He sputters uselessly. "Did you expect that to work?" "Huh? What?" "Did you think you were going to throw out the word union in a cave? You've never met my old man or a marine drill instructor. I've been yelled at by the best. Yours needs work." And then this story ends with some unintelligible screaming and hanging up. I have 2 entitled aunts, let's call them Mary and Terry, and a grandmother on my mom's side that have been a thorn in my family's side for decades now. This started back around 1998. I was roughly around 10 years old when I finally realized their true colors. Around that time, my parents had a falling out that ended in divorce, mutual overall. I lived with my mom. My brother lived with my dad until later. My mom got the house we had lived in after the split. For reference, it was a small 2-bed/1-bath house. Some backstory on the kind of people my aunts are. My mom was a recovering alcoholic at the time, about 3 years sober, and we were at my grandmother's house for Christmas. Some facts about my mom: she's highly allergic to birds and could easily be tempted into drinking at the time. Both facts were well known by her sisters. We started opening presents, and my mother's first present was from Mary. A lovely pair of gloves with real feathers on a wrist area. Great choice there. The following present was from Terry to my mom. A bottle of wine. How thoughtful for a recovering alcoholic. After we finished opening the presents, my mom confronted them about both items, which they naturally played the "oh my, we did not know that" card. And my grandmother said it's not a big deal, and that my mom should be thankful for what she got. They continued to do small jabs like this, playing the victim card over the years. A couple of years after the divorce, around 2000, my mom couldn't manage the house payments with a job she had anymore and decided we needed to move a few cities over. Unfortunately, she also decided to ask my grandmother and grandfather for help selling her house because they were both in a retail field, and she figured they'd help her out with the fees, paperwork, and so on, which they did help with and more. More on that later. We moved into the new house about 8 years later after a decent amount of family drama. My parents remarried, and we were living in a townhouse not too far from where we had originally moved after selling the first house. Now it's time for Mary to shine. My dad had never been fond of either of my mom's sisters and usually did not give them the time of day in most cases. One day out of the blue, Mary decided she was going to invite herself over to our house without even a phone call, which was odd because she lived over an hour away from us at the time. She arrived and graced us with her presence. Drop everything you were doing and pay attention to me mentality. I was, still am, an avid gamer at the time, and I was in the middle of an event on a game I was playing, so I decided to continue playing even after finding out she had arrived. Obviously, this was not to Mary's liking and proceeded to make it known to both my parents saying, "How can he keep playing that game when I'm here?" To which my dad apparently replied, "Well, you weren't invited nor let us know you'd be coming over to begin with, and he's doing something already." She did not like that. Rage mode activated. "Well, he's got no life if he's always sitting on that stupid computer playing games. You guys are setting him up for failure." Mind you, I was a straight A student, 4-year letterman in 3 different sports at the time. I heard the arguing but figured it was just the normal stuff she would cause every once in a while. So I kept playing my game until I heard my parents yelling something along the lines of, "Don't ever come back here," while slamming the door in Mary's face. Apparently she didn't like that and went straight to my grandmother's to complain and play the victim card, which naturally always worked. A few uneventful phone calls followed a bad day, but nothing came from it, other than she wasn't allowed over anymore. Adding this because I found it hilarious back then. When AOL was a thing to use for the internet back then, it would run over the phone line, and initially, whenever someone called the house, it would kick me off the internet. After a while, AOL changed it to have caller ID and confirm or deny option under it. Whenever I saw Mary calling, which was very often, I would deny her call. My parents did not have cell phones during this time, so she had no way to go around this lovely little feature until she confronted my parents about it. I played the, "Oh, I thought that pop-up was just an ad card." My parents thanked me for the laugh later because she had been so mad. Fast forward about another 8 years and I'm talking to my mom when she brings up that she finally confirmed that my grandmother and grandfather had actually tricked us out of roughly 50 grand when they helped her sell our first house. My grandmother accidentally let it slip that they had actually sold it for about 65k instead of the 15k they initially told my mom it went for. She was saying how it was going to be hard for them now because they had just sold their last rental home that they were using as an income source over the years. And the first rental they sold had lasted this long, which was actually our first house. I had joined the military soon after learning this and moved across the country, so I don't have the full details of what happened following that. But to summarize from what I learned from my parents, Mary lost her job due to her firm being sued into bankruptcy due to fraud. Surprise there. She moved into my grandmother's house soon after and spent the following year job searching, not having much luck due to her previous firm's situation. Terry lost her job due to layoffs, and the bank foreclosed on her house. She chose to just up and leave it without paying anything, so she couldn't go back to a normal solid job because they'd apparently go after her money if she did. Surprise face here. She spent the following years jumping from place to place until she spoke with my dad. More on that in a minute. Grandmother had Mary move in with her to help maintain her mortgage after my grandfather passed away about a year after I joined the military. They ended up renting out the 3rd bedroom to a college student since they both weren't able to afford the rent and other expenses. Mary would constantly call my mom demanding that my dad and she help with paying my grandmother's rent and for groceries. My parents simply said that she got enough from them when they sold their house and that they wouldn't see a cent more from them. A little over a year ago, Terry finally came to them asking for about 20k to buy a house out of state. A small mobile home similar to our first home, but a major fixer-upper. My dad wasn't fond of her but was more lenient when it came to her over Mary. So he said he'd think about it. When I heard about it, I highly protested the idea, explaining that she's the type that'll take the money and then constantly bring up excuses on why she'd be late to pay them back. A prediction that became fact not even 2 months later. Apparently, my dad had also figured this into his plan and explained it to me a few months later after my grandmother and Mary decided to finally move out and live with Terry. My dad had apparently loaned the money to my aunt, but he also signed ownership of the house she had bought with the money he loaned her. Long story short, if she doesn't pay, all three of them are on the streets. So my dad loopholed them into basically having them by the neck years later.